challenging year, and no doubt it will be a new Christmas and Advent experience for us all this year. So we're really happy to begin this journey together tonight, coming from a variety of places, as we heard some people. And later we'll have the chance to share thoughts, ideas, questions. I am Sister Mary Frohlich. I'm a religious of the Sacred Heart for 35 years now. I'm Canadian and I live in New York City. I moved here from San Diego in July to live with Sheila Smith and Lisa Busher in a welcoming community in Manhattan. And my ministry is that I serve as the Director of Vocation Ministry for our United States Canada province of the Society of the Sacred Heart. And I also do some interpretation and translation work. So now I'm going to pass this along to Teresa to introduce the evening.
Thank you very much, Mary. And thank you to all of you again for being here. It's great to see so many wonderful faces from different parts of my life and new faces too. And again, my name is Teresa Blumenstein. I'm one of the co-organizers of this discussion series that we're launching tonight. I am living in New York City, where I am a member of the Roman Catholic parish of St. Francis Xavier. And I also have the privilege here of working as a community organizer of sorts for a coalition of Catholic sisters, brothers, and priests who do human rights and environmental justice advocacy. I have identified as Catholic my whole life, but what that identity means to me has changed more times than I can count, and in more ways than I would dare bore you with while we're here tonight. But what I will say is that there's one piece of that evolutionary process that is relevant to our gathering tonight, which is that my faith journey has led me to the notion that faith and spirituality, when at their best, are unifying forces that draw us into closer relationship with one another and with everything around us. They help us to understand ourselves as inextricably interrelated and interdependent as members of a community, and they compel us to act in the best interest of the whole community. They even help us to see and connect beyond the language and the culture of our distinct religious traditions. And so at a time when ecological crisis and is colliding with so many other crises, to create an atmosphere of doubt, I've never felt a stronger desire for a justice-seeking community of hope that reaches across the many beautiful ways that we humans have of identifying ourselves. And for the past few years, trusted guides from my own religious tradition have helped me find one such pathway to community through the study and practice of eco-spirituality, or sometimes called spiritual ecology, which Sister Mary Frohlich will illuminate for us this evening. And this study has honestly educated and enriched my relationship with my own faith, with people of other faiths, and with the whole of the natural world. It's a joy to be with you all this evening, and in the discussion sessions to be held the next 4 Monday evenings to contemplate what divine lessons and graces the natural world has to offer us in a season that's probably best known for darkness and desolation rather than hope. And so with that, I will then continue relaying the microphone now to our third member of the co-organizing team, Sheila.
So good evening, everyone. I am very happy to be with each one of you. And I'd like to begin introducing myself by acknowledging the Lenape, both the past, present, and future, upon whose traditional territory I sit this evening. I'm very happy to be part of this discussion on eco-spiritual harvest as we descend into this darkest time of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. My name is Sheila Smith, and I was born and raised in Canada. I'm a religious of the Sacred Heart, and I have lived in New York City for almost 4 years. And I serve as the United Nations representative for the Society of the Sacred Heart worldwide. I absolutely love my work, and I find it just very nourishing and challenging. I'm learning every day, and I'm surrounded by a group of wonderful, amazing, smart, committed, and fun people from around the world. My own passion for social and ecological justice was sparked, first of all, by my parents, and in large part to the Indigenous peoples in Canada with whom I have lived for many years. I've been blessed to live with them in some parts of Canada that remain quite untouched by mainstream society. And I have also seen the hardship and the incredible work that Indigenous peoples need to invest to protect land, water, air, and animals to this day. And as a religious sister, I have found that this way of life has been a path that has helped me to be in solidarity with Indigenous peoples and others who are defending and promoting human and earth rights. I have many teachers, and I'd like to share as a prayer for this evening something that an Indigenous grandmother shared with me. It's been shared by the Mohawk Nation, and it's a version of the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address. So it's not really a prayer, and it's not really a blessing, but it is the way that Haudenosaunee peoples begin every meeting that they have, whether it's just a regular work day or whether it's a community gathering. They start it with this prayer, and I'm going to use an adapted version because the actual address is about twice as long. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with us tonight. So I'm just going to invite each one of us to settle comfortably into the seat that you're in and just breathe deeply, get comfortable. Shake out any stress that you may be carrying from the day. And come into this moment as a time for us to listen and to receive from the divine in each other, who wants to nurture our minds and hearts. Today, we have gathered, and we see that the cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now we bring our minds together as one, as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. Now our minds are one. We are all thankful to our mother, the earth, for she gives us all that we need for life. She supports our feet as we walk about her. It gives us joy that she continues to care for us, as she has from the beginning of time. To our mother, we send greetings and thanks. Now our minds are one. We give thanks to all the waters of the world for quenching our thirst and providing us with strength. Water is life. We know its power in many forms: waterfalls and rain, mists and streams, rivers and oceans. With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks to the Spirit of Water. Now our minds are one. We are all thankful to the powers we know as the four winds. We hear their voices in the moving air as they refresh us and purify the air we breathe. They help us to bring the change of seasons. From the four directions they come, bringing us messages and giving us strength. With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks to the four winds. Now our minds are one. We now send greetings and thanks to our eldest brother, the sun. Each day without fail, he travels the sky from east to west, bringing the light of a new day. He is the source of all the fires of life. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to our brother, the sun. Now our minds are one. We put our minds together to give thanks to our oldest grandmother, the moon, who lights the nighttime sky. She is the leader of woman all over the world, and she governs the movement of the ocean tides. By her changing face, we measure time, and it is the moon who watches over the arrival of children here on earth. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to our grandmother, the moon. Now our minds are one. We give thanks to the stars who are spread across the sky like jewelry. We see them in the night, helping the moon to light the darkness and bringing dew to the gardens and growing things. When we travel at night, they guide us home. With our minds gathered together as one, we send greetings and thanks to the stars. Now our minds are one. We gather our minds to greet and thank the enlightened teachers who have come to help throughout the ages. When we forget how to live in harmony, they remind us of the way we were instructed to live as people. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to those caring teachers. Now our minds are one. Now we turn our thoughts to the Creator, or Great Spirit, and send greetings and thanks for all the gifts of creation. Everything we need to live a good life is here, on this Mother Earth. For all the love that is still around us, we gather our minds together as one and send our choicest words of greetings and thanks to the Creator. Now our minds are one. We have now arrived at the place where we end our words. Of all the things we have named, it was not our intention to leave anything out. If something was forgotten, we leave it to each individual to send such greeting and thanks in their own way. Now our minds are one. And I'd like to give the word back now to Mary Frohlich.
Thank you, Sheila. It's my great pleasure now to introduce our speaker for tonight, Sister Mary Frohlich. I've known Mary for about 20 years as my Sacred Heart sister. And you may have seen the little explanation on the flyer of that Mary taught at CTU, Catholic Theological Union in Chicago for 26 years. She's a known expert in Carmelite spirituality and passionate about eco-spirituality. Mary did her doctorate at Catholic U in DC, and her latest book is called Breathed into Wholeness, Catholicity and Life in the Spirit. And Mary said, I said, well, what do you want me to say to introduce you, Mary? And she said, well, just don't make it long and boring. So I thought, well, I'm going to tell a story then. So about 20 years, well, no, in 2012, Mary was living in Rome for 5 months of preparation for her perpetual profession, her final vows. And I was there working as an interpreter because it was a group of women from RSCJ from all over the world. And each day, Mary would disappear up the hill into a sort of a secluded part of the garden. And the Villa Lante has these huge gardens. And we wondered, what was she doing? Praying? Probably. But soon we saw Mary descending from the heights of the garden with big black garbage bags. Mary was up there collecting and digging up plastic bottles that people had thrown over into our garden. She was caring for the earth, hundreds and hundreds of plastic bottles for recycling. And this really spoke to me then and still does now of Mary's love for the earth that she puts into action in a concrete way. So welcome, Mary. And if there's anything else you want to say about yourself, this is your chance. And we're very happy to have you with us tonight. Welcome, Mary.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Thank you, Mary, for that introduction, and thank you, Sheila, for the beautiful prayer, which is really amazing. That indigenous wisdom. You know, we don't need to be told that we're experiencing a crisis. We know that we, the human community and the whole Earth community, are in the midst of a very profound crisis, a series of crises, the pandemic, and then beyond that, the climate crisis and the political great challenges and economic challenges and so on. And that this is going to be our reality for a long time, is that we're going to be in a long period of crisis. And that doesn't sound right away like good news. A crisis is a time often of great loss, of things breaking down, and many people suffer a great deal when there's a crisis. But crisis is also a time that brings forth creativity and courage and new relationships. And that's true in the natural world. It's true among humans, and it's also true in the natural world. I mean, one example that's often given from the natural world, it's a very old one, but that 65 million years ago, an asteroid hit the planet Earth and wiped out most of the, in a certain sense, wiped out most of the ecosystems that existed, including the dinosaurs, who were the predominant species of that time. And of course, there was great suffering and extinctions and so on, but that left open the possibility then of the development of the mammals, and of course, ultimately, humans as among the mammals, becoming the more predominant species. So that's just one example. But meanwhile, here we are in our time of crisis. And it doesn't feel good. We can often feel helplessness and panic and despair. I just saw a video yesterday of an exhausted nurse in Grafton, North Dakota, where one of 8 people has the coronavirus, and she was crying. And she just said, I just want it to end. I just want it to end, but it's not ending. And that's a reality. That's going to be our reality in many ways for a while, that it's not ending. There's no way out but through. So tonight, we're going to explore a little bit on how rediscovering and redeveloping our connection with the natural world can be the key that enables us, both individually and communally, to not just endure this dark time, but to live deeply in and through this time, these challenges. So I have 5 parts to this. After this, that was the introduction. And then the 5 parts are, first, a little reflection on darkness, then stories, kinship, religion, and practices. So first, darkness. as we all know, we're here in the Northern Hemisphere, this is the time when it's getting darker every day. It's getting colder. Maybe it comes and goes a little bit, but basically it's just getting colder. I recently found a book, I discovered a book by a journalist named Jeff Sharlet, which is called This Brilliant Darkness. And he wrote it in a time when he was experiencing personal darkness of illness and grief, and he couldn't sleep. So he went out in the night and he met the people that are out in the night, like, you know, short order cooks and homeless people and so on. And he met them literally in the darkness, in the nighttime, but he also met them in the midst of their personal darkness of suffering. And what he said was, he said he had to come to terms with, quote, this brilliant darkness. The darkness is always there. It can be very beautiful. I don't necessarily want to shine a light that dispels it. I want to live with it. So that's our challenge, is how do we live with and in and through a time of darkness, or whatever that darkness may be, physical, emotional, spiritual, political. But we're going to begin with a little experiment. And this is, I don't know how, this may be very challenging because a lot of us are in cities, I think. I don't know exactly where people are, but we're going to take 2 minutes to, insofar as possible, to experience the cold and the dark. So if you can do it easily, you might step outside for a moment or open a window for a moment. If that's going to be really challenging and take you more than 2 minutes, or if you simply can't because you're on the 10th floor or whatever, then close your eyes and try to bring to mind a memory of an experience, a sense experience, the actual sense experience of the cold and the dark. So I invite you to do this little experiment for just 2 minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay, well, I hope people have managed to get back. So at this point, I'd like to invite you, if you wish to, and you don't have to do this, but if you wish to, you can put just a word or two or a short phrase in the chat. of what that experience evoked for you. And I wonder if maybe Sheila or someone else, someone of the other leaders could maybe read whatever comes up in the chat, if something comes up there.
So the words coming in include refreshment, unknown, discomfort, calm, stillness, loneliness, brisk refreshment. Manhattan is cold and dark and full of people on the move. Air.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it would be lovely if we could explore each of those, but I'll leave that to you to perhaps reflect more deeply on your own and others. But there's some sense in which each of those things that have been evoked are kind of like a story, or there's a story there of what darkness is for you, or at least what it is in this particular moment. So doing this little experiment really has two purposes. The first one is to bring us back to our senses. That we spend a lot of time in our mind, and I'm a person who loves to spend time in my mind, but we have to get back to our senses. We have to reconnect in an embodied way to the world that is around us. And it's only by doing that and learning to do that more and more consistently that we may be able to find a way to live through dark times rather than simply to endure them. So that's the first, is to come back to our senses. And the second is, when asking the question, what does it evoke? That's pointing toward the opening of the heart. The heart is where we create and live the stories of meaning and the stories of how we are in relationship to all the beings and the environments that are around us. So stories. I recently listened to a podcast by an author named Paul Kingsnorth, and it was in Emergence magazine, which I would recommend, by the way. And he was talking about how what we most desperately need in this time of crisis is a new story. He was talking about how we live, and we all live this, we all live the myth of progress. That is the story that our culture and our society and our economy make sense of the world by. And the myth of progress basically is that human beings are all that matters, that we are able to, and we are in the process of continually making life better and better for ourselves, headed toward a kind of technological utopia. And of course, this story is based in the assumption that the rest of nature, the rest of creation, the rest of the community of beings is just there for that purpose, to help us to get to this kind of utopian life. And we live that story. That really is the story of our culture. And it's a story that some of us actually are kind of benefiting from, because we are living pretty comfortably. We are able to resolve a lot of the kinds of suffering that most people have suffered from in the past. But it's not working. There's vast numbers of people for whom that story is not working at all right now. And it is certainly not working for future generations who will be left to deal with the radical destruction of the habitat of that humanity, and also obviously all other creatures depend upon. So we need a new story. How do we get there? Well, Paul Kingsnorth says the thing is, we can't just make one up, and we can't even just say, well, I like that story over there, so I'll take it. We have to live into it. We have to discover it through our senses, and our hearts and rebuilding relationships in new ways. And that's going to be the work of it's going to be the work of many lifetimes, but it's for us to begin. In some ways, we can't escape living within the story that our culture has created, but we can begin. We can begin to find a new story. Actually, another Jeff Charlotte, who I mentioned before, had another podcast, which was really fascinating because he said that there's many people in the United States right now for whom the myth of progress is not working. And a lot of them have found a new story. And that's the story of Trump and QAnon and so on, that they've discovered this new story and they feel like this is the answer. But in my opinion, that is not the story that we need. We need, and in fact, not just need, but that as a species, we probably are not even going to survive without finding a story in which we know ourselves and find our lives and our meanings completely embedded in and embraced by the entire family of Earth creatures. So we have to rediscover and learn the truth of our kinship with all creatures. And, that's a story, but it's also a scientific fact, actually, that the DNA studies show that all life on Earth, from the smallest to the largest, came from the same, share a common ancestor. So that means that it is not only a story, but it is a truth, a scientific truth, that we are kin with every living creature that lives now or has ever lived. And that means not only with the mammals, for whom it's easy for us to see our kinship because they kind of behave like us in some ways, but we are also kin with all the others, with the reptiles and the insects and the worms and the microbes and unfortunately even the viruses. But there's even more to this story, because the other thing that is being discovered by microbiology in the last couple of decades is how profoundly our lives and every aspect of our lives, our bodily life, is completely intertwined with and interdependent with billions of other life forms. And if you want to read about that, there's a book by Ed Young called I Contain Multitudes, which talks about the fact about these millions and billions of creatures that we can't see, but that live in and make possible our every aspect of our life, both interior, life as well as around us. And the realization that actually the type of life that we see, our own life and many of the creatures that we're most familiar with, are actually only a tiny, tiny corner of the vast web of species, and all of which are interdependent with one another. So religion, religions give us stories. Religions give us stories that the religions present to us as true stories. And of course, true in this case doesn't always mean the same thing as, historical truth, but it means a true story is one that actually genuinely fosters and deepens the fullness of life for the community of life. And religions tell us stories, give us stories that they present to us as true. And of course, I speak out of my tradition, which is the Christian and Catholic one, but other religions also have true stories. And other religions, as well as Christianity, have some problematic stories that need to be rethought. I think some of you probably know that not long ago, maybe you all know that not long ago, Pope Francis wrote a document called Laudato Si, in which he articulated the story of kinship. And so within the framework of Christianity, he said, all of us, meaning all creatures of the earth, are linked by unseen bonds and together form a kind of universal family, a sublime communion, which fills us with a sacred, affectionate, and humble respect. So we are finding that even at that level, there's the effort to articulate a new story. So that brings us to Advent. As we know, this is a season for Christians, and in the Northern Hemisphere, of course, it's calculated to coincide with the time of deepening darkness before the winter solstice, the time when the light begins to increase. And of course, that happened. Christmas was placed at the winter solstice because pagan cultures, probably most of them, celebrated the winter solstice. And so Christianity, by putting Christmas there, it wasn't because Jesus was actually born then, but Christmas was placed there because Christianity is saying this is the truth. The truth is that Christ is the light that is even more foundational than the light of the sun, and so on. So that's how it got there, but we live that now. We live that experience of Advent in the deepening darkness and the deepening cold in the Northern Hemisphere. But, you know, we may often tend to interpret Advent kind of in something like terms of the myth of progress, because that's a story that we're very familiar with. And if we interpret Advent that way, it's kind of like, well, we're every week or we're gradually getting more and more light, and then it breaks forth and we live happily ever after in the light. That would be kind of the myth of progress. And that really isn't the story of Advent. Advent is the time when it's getting darker and colder. Every day, it keeps on getting darker and colder. So where is the light in that time? Well, the light is only going to be found by living into these deep and necessary realities, not by denying them. So this is one of the things that I suggest to all of us, is that we take the time during Advent to discover and to befriend life in the darkness and in the cold. That it would include, the physical experience of that, even if that isn't so pleasant to us, but to let it be and to let it enter into us in some way and find out what that speaks to us. Maybe to learn a little bit about how life survives and even depends on these times of cold and darkness. So return to our senses and to our hearts and discover what is this reality of darkness and cold able to teach us. So that brings me to the last section, which is just a few comments on some practices. And I'll start with a couple thoughts from Otto Scharmer of the Presencing Institute. And I'm kind of paraphrasing some of what he said in a blog post, which is called "The Darkest Hour is Just Before the Dawn," which was, as I recall, a song when I was young, and I guess the song is still around. But before it was a song, I think it was a proverb. So anyway, Otto Scharmer took that, and actually he wrote it not long before the election, so maybe he had that context as well. But he said that that in order to make a difference within the current reality of darkness, and he was talking about social and political, and he was talking about all the elements of darkness. He says we need to activate and embody 3 core capacities. Again, I'm paraphrasing somewhat. He says to listen with humility to reality. And I would add with our senses and with our hearts. And then secondly, his second one is discovering and fostering networks of interconnection. So that he's focusing maybe more on the social and political. And I would add to that the networks of interconnection with the creatures of the earth, the whole environment of the earth. And then Scharmer's third one is acting from the field of the future. So what is being drawn forth within this, when we listen with humility to reality, and when we foster and discover networks of interconnection, what future calls us forth? So those are some ideas, but then a couple of things you might do. One is, I would strongly suggest that if you haven't already, that you watch the movie My Octopus Teacher. It's on Netflix, and it's a story about a filmmaker who was in a very dark personal space, burned out, depressed, turmoil, and he, in that context, he took the time. It took a whole year to enter into a discovery of the natural world, and specifically to form a relationship with an octopus, of all things. It's an amazing movie, and it really says what I'm trying to say, but it says it a whole lot better. So if you can, watch that movie. And then one other thing, and this comes in the my bio one. I think Mary didn't mention it, but I'm being trained as a forest therapy guide, and this kind of comes out of that. But take the time to make friends with a tree. Probably there's a lot of trees that you walk by maybe every day, and maybe you've been walking by them for years or decades and you never even looked at them. So find one, just one, and get to know it, and see what it might say to you. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, very much for your food for thought. I think the challenging questions you present, I come back to, are how are we living in, with, and through darkness? How can we face that with our senses open, unshielded, even though our instinct may be to turn away from cold, to bring light into darkness? How can we sit with what immediately feels like discomfort, and learn to learn from it by paying attention to our own instinctive reactions and what other reactions we could have if we only take the time and have the patience to be with those experiences and learn from them, and pay attention then to what sensation that experience evokes in us. We have of course, also 3 pieces of advice that you mentioned from Sharma at the end. We need to listen with humility to reality, with both hearts and senses, as you added, fostering networks of interconnection, both in a social realm and also with our natural world, and act from a field of the future. Think beyond the reality as it is now, and act as beings of that future that we hope to see, that we hope to create, to bridge that gap. I just want to take a moment now, well, more than a moment actually, because this is meant to be a space for personal exploration and reflection as well. So I'd like to give us all just 5 minutes on your own. Feel free to keep camera on or off as you please. And if you're a journaler, maybe jot some things down. If you have any thoughts, any kernels of wisdom, if any of what Mary has shared is shimmering in some way for you, take a moment to kind of collect those thoughts and ideas for a question that you may have for her, or an idea that you may want to take with you from this first session tonight. And then we will come back together. I'll ring a little bell in 5 minutes to bring us back together. And if we have any questions for Mary, then we can have a little exchange then. So I relinquish everyone to whatever their quiet space is for 5 minutes to process what we've been hearing. That is evoked anytime someone asks you to have a relationship with something other than a human being. And So how can we process that and not shy away from it or be overtaken by it, but kind of in the same way that we were trying to live through the sensation of darkness or cold and lean into and experience it? How can we kind of mentally get around the instinctual feeling of foolishness in building relationships outside of with other humans?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I say make friends with a tree, I realize I'm kind of leaping over a few steps there, because the first step is always to use your senses and to very consciously engage your senses. You know, just to look, to feel, to even, you know, to smell. Maybe not to taste, but maybe on certain occasions there can be even tasting of some parts of a tree. So that's the first thing, is that they just really consciously engaging with your senses, and which means slowing down and paying attention and observing in a way that we don't usually do in our daily lives. So that's really the bottom line. And then, so that when I say make friends with the tree, you know, it's like, if you're going to make friends, you have to sort of spend some time. You have to keep coming back, maybe, you know, I mean, it doesn't all happen all in one occasion. And you have to be open, and so that's an openness of heart to whatever happens. You know, it's not that there's, you know, the tree probably isn't going to literally speak to you, but in some metaphorical sense, it may speak to you. It may, and so that's, you know, like I said, there's a process involved in making friends with any being, and that includes with the tree. The question of feeling foolish, yeah, I mean, you know, the tree hugger joke, and actually within the training for the forest therapy, they tell us to really actually do that and go out and hug trees. And you do feel foolish, especially if you're doing it in the city. Now, that's one possibility, is that you might be able to find a place where you can do that if you actually want to hug it, which you don't have to, but if you do, you know, in a little bit more secluded place. But it's it's the question of of discovering a different relationship and discovering a different story of how we relate to other creatures. And that does mean moving out of our comfort zone, at least to some degree. You know, you don't have to go all the way out and all the way all at once, but in order, you know, we get comfortable in our stories of how things work, and we have to live into a new one, little bit by little bit.
Thanks. And I will relay for anyone else who would like to ask a question. You may type it in the chat box if you wish, or you can kind of wave if you'd like to unmute yourself and share it. I'll relay one question that's in the chat box so far, which is, how can we help others see, and more importantly, feel that we are all interconnected and have interdependent needs, wants, hopes, and fears, when so many individuals live a reality that is self-focused and lonely? How do we make that part of the story come to life for so many when it's just nowhere near a part of their picture now?
Wow, that of course is a very huge question. But again, you know, just to begin, inviting people to have different experiences within the natural world, I think, and inviting them to experience a different relationship. Again, you know, taking time for the senses, taking time for a more contemplative approach to the natural world. I mean, it's only, in one sense, it's only one piece, because obviously if we're talking about people's social and economic lives of isolation, and when we're talking about the pandemic, you know, it's even more so. But so it isn't a simple solution. But the I think, you know, maybe more broadly, I think I would hope that maybe people who work with young people, children, or in some settings with adults, that you know, to organize opportunities for people to be in nature and to reflect on that, to slow down and to experience, because it, you know, it's natural to kids, but it's natural to kids to feel that relationship and to love that relationship with other creatures. But today, many kids don't have too much of that opportunity, I think, and maybe even more so for other people. So I certainly don't have a simple solution, but that's the little piece of it that I guess I'm offering is think of ways to engage people with the natural world and to help them reflect on what that experience is like for them, and what it might mean for them, what it might evoke for them.
Some ways, Mary, you're reminding me of a phrase like unlearning the myth of progress, or unlearning certain stories, that there are truths we kind of instinctively understand as children, and they get washed out or shamed away, or you're made to feel foolish for holding on to them beyond childhood. But in fact, there is an important truth there that is kind of an inborn guiding wisdom, and that's why you have it as a child. It is instinctive. It's kind of a gift from generations, many generations before, but unfortunately too quickly put under a bushel basket, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book actually that's been written, and now I don't remember the name of the author, but it's called Nature Deficit Disorder. And he was specifically dealing with children, but actually I think it's true of adults too, that connection with nature and lively participation in the natural world is not just a nice thing, it's necessary. It's necessary for physical and psychological health. And the fact that children are not having that is a big part of many of the problems of children. I mean, up through my generation at least, and maybe even beyond. So I grew up in the 1950s, way back then. You know, we were outdoors all the time, and I think that was true. And children just lived outdoors when they could. You know, but now, you know, many children, there's very little opportunity. So anyway, the nature deficit disorder is a naming of this. That it's a real thing. It's not just it's not just a nice idea. It's a real thing. And more recently, I mean, on the scientific level, there have been a lot of studies done of the health benefits of being in nature. I mean, I don't like to just reduce it to that, but it's an important truth that people are physically and mentally healthier if they spend time outdoors and if they actually experience a positive connection with the natural world.
Great. Were there any other, I'm not seeing anything else in the chat box. Would anyone just, oh yes, okay. Cecily would like to, go ahead, Cecily.
This may be kind of redundant actually, but I was wondering if maybe you could speak to or give advice on part of my religious tradition, and I'm sure that of many others, is this kind of language of human dominion over Earth, or even stewardship of Earth, that creates a hierarchy, placing humans over the rest of the natural world. And so what advice or reflections might you have on kind of this unlearning of the hierarchy, both personally and then in kind of religious communities?
Yeah, I mean, actually, there was an article written 30 or 40 years ago which sort of blamed Christianity for the the problem that we're describing of human domination or destruction of nature based on certain biblical texts. And since then, there's been a flood of writing by theologians and so on to say, no, it's not true. That there's other ways to interpret the biblical text, that the biblical texts should not be interpreted in terms of domination or of exploitation or of a complete hierarchy of humans, but more in terms of community and participation and so on. But the reality is, and this is true of any religion or any system of meaning, there are many different interpretations. I mean, you have the stories, the Bible stories, and people weave them together into different interpretations or different meanings. And people have very much woven together some of the parts of the Bible with the myth of progress, as if that's what it's all about. But there are definitely other ways of weaving together the Christian story. And certainly when we look at Jesus, and now he doesn't, I mean, there's not a huge amount of discussion of his relationship with the natural world, but you can find the sense of his more of a sense of community and so on there. But again, it's an interpretation. I mean, you have to find the interpretation you have. And the thing is that we always tend to interpret in terms of the story that we already have inside of us, so that, different cultures bring different systems of meaning and assumptions, I guess you could say, to the same biblical text. And our culture brings this myth of progress to the biblical text and assumes that that's what it says, because that's the obvious, that's how reality is, according to the story. So I guess the advice would be to look, if you're looking for different interpretations, is to maybe to find something to read that gives a different interpretation, and we could probably, I could help people with that if they wanted to. I don't have it like on the tip of my mind, but there are some good books that could give you a whole different perspective on what the Christian tradition understands about relationship with nature.
And actually, that's a perfect setup, Mary, for me to add that since this is the beginning of a series, which will have 4 more weeks of Monday night discussions coinciding with the 4 weeks of the Advent season for, well, the 4 weeks Advent in the Catholic Church, otherwise, depending on what church you follow. But that this is under the theme of Gathering Earth's Graces, is that we are going to be progressively collecting and sharing different resources and sources of inspiration over the course of this series. So Mary, we will definitely follow up with you to get some concrete resource recommendations in answer to that question, and we'll add that to our altar, so to speak, on which we're gathering these graces and inspirations. Was there any other comments or questions anybody wanted to share? Yeah, Nora, go ahead.
Mary, I love your idea of befriending a tree. And to me, that comes easily because I have such a love for trees. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about befriending a mosquito or a spider, or perhaps the more unlovable parts of nature. Because wondering what that might speak to about befriending or uncovering the more unlovable parts of humanity or ourselves.
Well, that's a very good comment. I mean, ultimately, the befriend, I think I say befriend a tree because that's probably one of the easier ones for us, for most people. First of all, to find a tree and it'll sit there for you, and it's big enough to kind of, you know, have lots of aspects that we can connect to. But yes, ultimately the point is to befriend many parts of the natural world, to befriend landscapes, to befriend, and as you say, to befriend the parts of the natural world that we are not so naturally attracted to. You know, and again, not to be completely romantic about nature. I mean, you know, it's a tough world out there, and nature is not just all, you know, happy, touchy-feely. There's things we need to be careful about. We need to be careful about safety and any kind of, you know, contact with the natural world. But yes, that ultimately we need to discover ourselves as kin and partners and participants in the natural world. And just as we know from human relationships, that doesn't mean that that it's always fun and easy. You know, there's times when the relationships are very difficult, and that we even have to say, no, I can't do this. That's a reality with human relationships, and it's a reality with our relationship with the natural world too, that we can't always bear it or whatever. But to begin to explore, to discover the relationships that are there waiting for us, and that actually the natural creature, the other creatures might be interested in us too. They might be much happier if we were in a different relationship with them, and we can discover that.
I always, to add on there, I always find that even with encountering, just like encountering people where I feel like I have a defensive reaction, when I encounter other creatures and feel like I have a defensive reaction, I try to remember, maybe did I misstep here? Is it putting me in check in a way that I probably should be checked? It's kind of an invitation to some kind of self-review or humility. So maybe that's what we get, you know, if you pick a hornet's nest, well, that might just be your fault. You might be in the wrong place. There are boundaries for us too.
Yeah, and that's important to emphasize. I mean, again, that there are parts. For example, we are not too eager to befriend the coronavirus. You know, I mean, we are trying to protect ourselves from that, and that is a natural creature, which in the big picture, you know, has its place. But that doesn't mean that we rush out to encounter it. And there are other aspects of nature that, so yeah, there are definitely boundaries, but there's a lot we can do. And there's a lot we can do even in the city. I mean, that's another important point, is that I have often sort of said, oh, woe is me, you know, I don't live out in the country where I wish I lived. Well, I do wish I lived in the country, but in reality, nature is here. The natural world is here. It was here first, it will be here after I'm gone. And if I would pay attention to that, there would be a lot for me to learn.
Okay, so any further comments or questions from anybody? No hands, no comments? Okay, then I will move us into wrapping up and talking about where the series is going from here, and then a very brief closing. So I will hand it then back to Mary Frohlich.
Well, Mary Frohlich, thank you so much. I think we are well launched into a brilliant darkness of Advent. I hope we all feel that invitation to really welcome what's coming. to discover and befriend the Advent darkness, the cold. What is it saying to us, and how is it calling us forth? And we're very happy to have these next 4 Monday evenings together. And I think one of the things, what, Joe, was it your question about how do we introduce people to, these tough conversations that maybe they're not, well, let's invite them. Let's invite them into our circle. And for the next 4 weeks, explore together. We are going to use over the next 4 weeks 4 traditional Advent themes. So hope, peace, joy, and love. But we're not going to use them in a traditional way. We're going to open them up in terms of our moment, in our lives, in the world, our earth, just the reality around us. How do we embrace this Advent reality, this moment? We're not going to have a keynote each week. It's going to be interactive. We're going to explore together with our senses and hearts, as Mary said. And if you can't come to them all, come when you can. Invite people to come when they can. Invite those who might benefit by this opportunity, this reflection. And we'll hope to see you again next week as we build this journey together. So just full of gratitude. Thank you all so much for coming, and let's hold each other in this time of darkness and cold. Hold each other with our senses and with our hearts. And let's have our closing prayer, which Sheila's going to lead us in.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you, Mary Frohlich, for your insights and your passion, and for really launching us very well into that brilliant darkness. And I just wanted to pick up on one word that Mary Finlayson used, and that kind of came from Joe's question, the word together. That is what this is about. And I guess one of the insights that I had while you were sharing, Mary Frohlich, is that this invitation to walk into the darkness and the cold is so much easier when we can do it together. And that's the wisdom of religious traditions and spiritual traditions and friendships and wisdom traditions, is that piece of doing it together, supporting each other. So during our 4 weeks together, we're going to be invited to create a harvest altar. So you can do that in your heart, or you can have a physical altar in your home, where you can place symbols of what you harvest in these weeks. That we are going to be walking together into the darkness and the cold, and learning and listening from each other and from the natural world as we have been invited. So we can start to do that tonight. So I'm just going to ask us to take one moment pause where we can just reflect on what we have harvested from this conversation tonight. And just hold that in your heart, or write it down if you've got your journal there. Write down what you have harvested. And with those gifts that we have harvested or started to harvest this evening, let us pray. And let us pray as we live into this Thanksgiving. This is a beautiful way to start the Thanksgiving holiday, which is also about harvest. But for many, if not most of us, we will not be having our normal gatherings this year, in a physical form anyways. So may this evening that we have spent together begin a harvest of blessings for our communities, our families, and for each one of us. May we together feel each other's love through connecting with Mother Earth, befriending that tree. You know, that'll be a personal experience, but we've all heard this, we've all experienced this evening together, so we can remember that we're part of a community that is also connecting with Mother Earth in new ways. So maybe get to know a tree or just go outside and walk on the beautiful body of Mother Earth. May we find our way through the lessons of the life of our breath. Maybe this week, taking a deep breath and asking guidance from that breath the next time that we are stressed or overwhelmed. May we flow with life like water. Maybe allowing ourselves to be changed or to let go of who we are not, so that we can remain true to our soul nature of who we really are. Because we really are children of Mother Earth and Father Sun. We are all students of the air, the breath, and sisters and brothers with water. May we carry this evening in our hearts, and may it help us to take time this holiday season to find the ways to love each other in the midst of our collective humanity. And may we carry each other in our hearts and prayers. Amen.
Thanks again, everyone, for being here. I appreciate this is a new idea for many, and you've gone out on a limb just by showing up. So I thank you deeply for that. And I will follow up with all of you since you registered in order to get this far. I'll send with you, there will be kind of some prompt, something to look at ahead of next week's discussion if you choose to join us. But don't worry if you can't make it. But if you feel like taking a look at that prompt and maybe starting to build your altar or your grace table of graces, that prompt for that will be there, and that will help kind of feed our discussion next time. And the theme will be hope next time. So hope to see you if you can. Thanks again for being here. Your presence is most appreciated.
Thank you all. Bye. Have a good night. Good week.
Bye.
Thanks,
Good night.
everybody.
Bye.